western part of the U.S., particularly Imperial County, California. So in looking at this chart produced by forage experts Daniel Putman, Bill Matthews, and Daniel Summers, there has been a steady and expanding forage market in the U.S. While Japan has historically dominated this trade, and while this trade has declined in recent years, the chart tells another story: the emergence of China as a primary buyer of U.S. forage. So this short and by no means complete presentation looks at the relational transformations wrought by this trade, its historical context, as well as the socio-ecological foundations it both produces and is limited by. So there's been many significant transformations in California's dairy operations over the 20th century, the most important of which is California's dominance over the U.S. dairy industry as a whole. Since 1993, California has ranked first in the U.S. in the production of milk, butter, ice cream, and non-fat dairy milk, and second in cheese production. In fact, in 2016, California produced 19% of milk in the U.S. The growing importance of dairy in California is due to a number of factors. That includes the utilization of CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations, and isolated dairy regions. In other words, California dairy, unlike Wisconsin or New York, is structured along more structured along an industrialized, centralized, and highly capitalized style of dairy rearing, production, and distribution. In addition, dairying in California, like most livestock ventures in the U.S., are highly intertwined with agricultural experiment stations and other scientific endeavors to make their operations even more productive, rationalized, and efficient. Lastly, this growing importance is political. For most of California's history, large-scale agricultural operations have been historically favored on the local, state, and federal levels, mostly at the expense of small farmers, farm labor, other industries, and the environment. Geographically, much of California's dairy wealth stems from the Central and San Joaquin Valley region. That said, Southern California has nonetheless played a significant role in shaping dairy throughout the state. Imperial County, which lies east of San Diego, all the way in the bottom southeast corner, is one of the hottest and historically driest parts of North America, and now is one of the most agriculturally productive regions due to its receiving the lion's share of water emanating from the diverted Colorado River. One of the earliest and most productive ventures in Imperial County was dairy, especially butter production. This was due to many reasons, but mainly was attributed to scarce labor reserves, nearby feed networks, and local markets. Despite being one of California's largest dairy producers, by the 1960s, the Imperial County dairy industry collapsed. There were many reasons for this decline, including deficiencies in long-distance refrigerated transport, a declining local market, and the growing efficiency in the production and transportation of forage products. The decline of Imperial County dairy can also be attributed to a consolidating regional market. By far the biggest production center in the south of California during the first half of the 20th century was southwestern Los Angeles County, named Dairy City. As urbanization increased and land values rose, dairy farmers relocated their ventures from Dairy City to Chino in San Bernardino County during the 1950s. During this time, Imperial County growers focused on providing these transforming and consolidating dairying operations in Los Angeles and Chino with much needed inputs, particularly forage for feed. While this relationship has mostly held steady, by the end of the 20th century, those dairying operations in Chino have been under increased pressures to relocate. Like Dairy City before them, one of the central culprits in this relocation has been rising land values. Many of these operations are relocating north to the San Joaquin and Central Valley, which is not only disrupting dairy farming in Southern California, but also nearby input industries. As a result, Imperial County farmers have been looking for new markets to sell their forage, particularly abroad. While there have been many buyers, none has become as important as China. Before 1978, there was little to no dairy market in China, but that has largely changed. While China's per capita consumption rates are well below other countries, China is currently the third top producer of dairy in the world, and is quickly growing in terms of consumption. In fact, between 1990 and 2014, dairy consumption rose from 255,000 tons to 1,416,000 tons. This growing market for milk hasn't only influenced greater production and consumption, but also import. In 1990, only 32,000 tons of dairy were imported, but by 2014, that number rose to 1,071,000 tons. Much of this import has had to do with Chinese consumers not trusting domestic sources of dairy, which will be explored a little later. Growing consumption of dairy in China, combined with growing meat and egg consumption, has had profound impacts on the global food system. Food regime scholar Philip McMichael argues that unlike previous food regimes, where both the import and export of grain has been used to subsidize wages, China is reorganizing the feed livestock complex in a way to support its multinational agribusiness sector and supply a rising middle class with their growing demand for both meat and dairy. This has had vast consequences in not only how the dairy market is organized on a global scale, but also how it is both formed and formative of specific environments, their structures, and populations. This is especially important when looking at the growing urban landscape in China. This in itself has led to a transformation of diets, particularly as it relates to the consumption of dairy. While the reasons for this are complex, one important facet is the proliferation of centralized supermarkets offering consumers a wide array of food choices. Furthermore, over the past years, China's central government has taken a proactive role in stressing the nutritional qualities of livestock products, particularly dairy. Dairy consumption has not only been stressed in China's Ministry of Health's dietary guidelines, but also in advertisements run on state-controlled television and radio. In 2008, China's dairy market was hurt by a scandal which implicated the use of additives, namely melamine, to dairy products, leading to thousands of infants falling ill and some dying. This scandal was followed by other scandals, resulting not only to an overall distrust of China's domestic dairy products, but a state-directed overhaul of the industry. This included many things. For one, it included the construction of giant cow hotels where small dairy farmers are incentivized to relocate themselves and their cattle to centralized milk-producing facilities in order to take advantage of modern technologies and standardized practices offered to them. In addition to cow hotels, the government and multinational agribusiness ventures have worked in the establishment of large consolidated dairy operations. For example, while the overwhelming majority of dairy farms in China hold 5 cows or fewer, Shefali Sharma and Zhang Rao note, quote, there was a 72% increase in farms with 500 to 999 cows and a 55% increase in farms with over 1,000 cows between 2008 and 2009 alone, unquote. Farms holding 10,000 and even as high as 40,000 head of cattle are not uncommon now, and last year plans were announced to construct the world's largest dairy farm with 100,000 head of cattle in the Mudanjiang province as a joint China-Russia venture. China's policies concerning dairy have also been bolstered by international institutions such as the World Bank, who in 2006 approved a $100 million loan to work in modernizing and standardizing milk production in the Heilongjiang province in China. These policies not only concern international institutions, but also foreign dairy companies. Nestle Wyeth and Abbott, Mead Johnson, and Dan & Dumex have all opened factories and distribution centers in China and have sometimes partnered with domestic producers. Such changes have not only been felt in China, but to input markets as well, especially in its Southern California forage markets. In analyzing the global dairy livestock complex, many scholars have put the lion's share of attention on the global production and trade in inputs such as corn and soybeans, while ignoring other essential inputs such as forage, particularly alfalfa. Alfalfa has a long domesticated history stretching back to at least 6,000 BCE and is widely considered by its cultivators as, quote, queen of the forages. The reason for this title is not only due to alfalfa's ability to replenish lost nitrogen in the soil, but also its high yield as well as its utilization as a high protein and high energy feedback for livestock. In addition, dairy farmers favor alfalfa not only for its energy and protein, but also its ability to rapidly digest in the cow's rumen. Currently, the dairy industry in the U.S. accounts for 75% of the alfalfa grown there, but there is a growing global demand. For instance, the growth of China's large dairying operations has correlated with increased alfalfa imports. In fact, alfalfa is said to make up between 40 to 50% of dry cattle feed in China's dairies, with 95% of that alfalfa coming from the U.S. As demand for alfalfa increases, both the Chinese government and its agribusiness are looking for ways to streamline supplies to both secure distributors and decrease costs. This has resulted in numerous strategies. For one, China's dairy operations are buying more foreign cattle breeds known for producing higher quantities of milk. Furthermore, Chinese buyers have not only established partnerships with foreign merchants to procure alfalfa, but have also established companies and purchased lands abroad strictly for the growing and export of alfalfa. In fact, Chinese companies hold millions of acres of land dedicated to forage production in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Ukraine, as well as parts of Africa and South America. Furthermore, this growing foreign market has brought about the transformation to the practices of forage growers throughout the U.S., particularly in Imperial County. Historically, forage, whether it be alfalfa, Sudan grass, Bermuda grass, etc., are some of Imperial County's top agricultural commodities. During the 1960s, Imperial County growers began exporting forage, namely cube Sudan grass, to Japan. This growing international trade led to numerous changes in how forage was produced, packaged, and shipped. These changes included the moisture level of bales, the time of cutting the grass to achieve certain colors of green, the adoption of new machinery, the reorganization of planting and harvesting to meet year-round shipments, as well as the further standardization and grading of forage types. One of the most recent and most contentious transformations regarding the production of forage in Imperial County has been related to genetic modification and China's aversion to it. In fact, in late 2014, Chinese authorities turned away hundreds of containers containing Roundup alfalfa from the U.S. and blacklisted many exporters due to this. This adversity has led to the establishment of the Imperial Valley User Agreement to restrict the use of Roundup-ready alfalfa, making the county the only non-genetically engineered alfalfa seed producing region. Growers in Imperial Valley who want to grow Roundup-ready alfalfa must meet strict isolation requirements before doing so. These transformations have not only impacted the growth of forage, but also its export. New export companies have sprung up throughout the county and have not only established relationships with foreign importers, but have developed the necessary technological and transportation infrastructure to meet the standards and regulations of receiving countries. Furthermore, Chinese companies such as S&S AgriSource have worked in establishing a foothold in the Southern California foreign export market. So, the last part, contradictions and outlooks. Between 2007 and 2013, the export of alfalfa from the U.S. increased approximately 60%, most of which has been attributed to the growing Chinese market. That said, over the past few years, as we saw, hay exports have been declining. Daniel Putman, Bill Matthews, and Daniel Summer have attributed this decline to decreased demand in the United Arab Emirates, the Long Beach port slowdown, and high prices of hay, and strong U.S. currency. They also note that lower milk prices in China may soften demand as the prolonged drought in California at the time might limit produced acreage, leading to more shortages. That said, the scholars are optimistic of the trade's growth in the future, noting the possibility of China opening up their market to genetically modified alfalfa as well as lower hay prices. While these facets are important, there are many things these experts leave out. First is the growing demand for livestock in China, which is complex. On the one hand, there is little sign of China's dairy sector slowing down, and China is even poised to overtake the U.S. as the largest dairy market within the next couple of years. On the other hand, there are political moves being made to slow down the consumption of livestock products within China. In fact, the central government is looking to cut out livestock consumption by as much as 50% to reduce their output of greenhouse gases by 1 billion tons by 2030. Furthermore, the forage export experts don't consider the socio-ecological contradictions of this trade. The livestock industry, this is from Tony Weiss's book, according to Tony Weiss, brings with it an ecological hoofprint, as it links together numerous exhaustive and destructive practices to both human and non-human actors. This includes not only direct dairy operations, but those sectors interlinked with it. This is true not only for industrialized dairy operations in China, but also those established throughout Southern California. In looking at alfalfa production in Imperial County, these forage experts have pointed out that alfalfa is beneficial to the environment and that it replenishes lost nitrogen in the soil. That said, alfalfa crops still require potassium and phosphorus fertilizer, as well as an array of pesticides and herbicides which outlet into California's degrading Salton Sea, contributing to the area's current plague of toxic dust storms. Also, alfalfa is a water-thirsty crop, which has led to the vast pushback by social movements in terms of its production and foreign trade, especially in times of drought. This transforming trade has also led to the dispossession of small and medium-sized farmers as seen by this chart. As the chart suggests, small farms are declining in China, while small dairy farms are declining in China, while centralized ventures in China are increasing. This can be due to many reasons, including the inability of farmers to compete or being pushed off the land forcefully. In fact, as Fred Magdoff and others have suggested, there is a growing trend of land dispossession in the Chinese countryside. Furthermore, as Magdoff suggests, supermarkets rarely deal with China's small farmers and stick to dealing with large producers, thus cutting small farmers out from important networks. In all, what we're seeing is small ownership to a proletarianized dairy workforce. Similar processes can be seen in Imperial County, especially as monocrop forage fields that require little, especially when monocrop forage fields that require little to no extra labor. While farms in the region have always tended towards concentration, this process has intensified in recent years, correlating with the China trade as well as water trade-offs and economic diversification in the region. In fact, between 2007 and 2012, the number of farms in Imperial County decreased from 452 to 421, while the average size per farm increased from 945 acres to 1,225 acres. In this short and by no means complete presentation, I have focused on specific locales whose relationship to each other have worked in bringing about a new nature tied to the larger global dairy livestock complex. While its nature has led to the proliferation of both cultural tastes and dairy product, it is a nature based on the intensified extraction and depletion of environments, along with the dispossession of small producers. More than that, it is a nature whose only logic is accumulation, thus undercutting the material conditions allowing for its expansion in the first place. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much for the presenters. We are a bit late, but I think it's lunchtime, so we can have a couple of questions. Maybe the three presenters could stand up. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could maybe describe a bit of the social conditions, I guess the religious and social backgrounds of some of these migrant workers and the farmers as well. I think this is quite interesting, especially given you mentioned the anti-colonial movements of Nehru and Gandhi, but you know, from an anti-colonial perspective, from an Ambedkar perspective, it would be interesting to know that.
These were great presentations. Thank you all. I have a very simple question for Tara about the process of tar production and why. You talked about, of course, why why tar production came from that area as opposed to like a different location than Finland, or why that was like a big tar producing region. You talked about it a little bit, but I was wondering if there's obviously there's big pine forests, but just more about the process of producing tar and why the tar frontier ended up in that specific location.
Can have a second round.
Can I respond? Okay, thank you for that question, and that's very important. I didn't get time to touch upon that at all in my presentation, but there is obviously a lot to say about the religious and the caste profiles of these labor migrants. So what comes up in the research that I've done is that majority of these labor migrants are either landless, they have, landless means having less than 1 acre of land, and sometimes no land at all. But on occasion, you'll also find people who have up to 5 acres of land and sometimes more. But majority of these labor migrants are people at the lower ends of the caste hierarchy, meaning they're either scheduled tribes or scheduled caste, the Dalits. So these do constitute the majority of people who are forced to move out. And in a way, this corresponds to the hierarchy of land ownership, in which caste is also deeply embedded. So the large landowners invariably tend to be from the upper castes and the upper classes. And they don't migrate, they don't migrate because still they have the ability to hire wage workers within the village. So people who are unable to migrate sometimes end up working within the village itself for people who have larger plots of land. So that is what I was able to see, in both in Karnataka and Rajasthan, that it is the indigenous people, the tribals, and the Dalits who are migrating. Going to Ambedkar, and that's a very, very interesting question, because Ambedkar held the view that cities would be the places where these hierarchies would break down, and there would be some sort of emancipatory assimilation within urban space. But what I see is that that's far from the case. People from North Karnataka who come, and the pictures I showed you, will actually all go and live together. The Dalits will live together. And it's even interesting how they organize the spatial architecture around themselves. So people from Tamil Nadu, I still have to understand why. Tamil Nadu is another southern state. They will build similar kinds of blue tents, but the walls of their huts will be about this high. And, better built. So it's not clear to me exactly what explains this, but people there know immediately, oh, this is a Tamil settlement, just by looking at the kind of hut they built. So it is very